Good evening. My name's Andrew Bridgen. I'm the Independent Member of Parliament for North West Leicestershire, and I'd like to welcome you to this specialist webinar for the Channel Islands. I've been an MP since 2010, and I've led the charge in the UK Parliament, raising concerns, legitimate concerns about the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccines and the worrying trends in excess deaths in the UK and around the world since 2021. This evening, we've got an expert panel to be proud of, and we're making their contributions. And I'm particularly pleased and delighted that we've got Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin to chair the meeting this evening. And he's going to keep us all in order, make sure everyone sticks to the timetable, and he'll also field any questions from the audience at the end. As you may be aware, I delivered an important speech, led a debate in the House of Commons only last week, centred around my concerns around the COVID-19 vaccines and the trends in excess deaths we've been seeing in the UK. This should also be of interest to our Channel Islands and also people around the world. And for that reason, given the lack of focus and attention the issue of vaccine harms is received in the Channel Islands, this call has been arranged with invitations extended to members of local government in both Jersey and Guernsey, and also invitations have been sent out to all local GP practices in the Channel Islands, and also the local media. The issue I raised around safe and effective in the Chamber just over a week ago, safe and effective was actually the marketing slogan for thalidomide. And we actually saw, following that scandal, which was covered up in the UK for 11 years, thalidomide was withdrawn in 1961, but it was 1972 before the word thalidomide was allowed to be spoken in the chamber of the House of Commons. Strasbourg Court and judges decided that successive speakers of the House of Commons had deliberately suppressed all debate and questions about thalidomide for 11 years. Well, I'm not going to let that happen this time. And after that scandal, the pharmaceutical companies were banned from using the slogan safe and effective without severe caveats. But what we saw with COVID-19 was that politicians, institutions and the media became the marketing arm for Big Pharma. And the people were hypnotized by safe and effective in our nation and around the world. And I wish they were safe and effective. But as the evidence has unravelled, it's clear that they are neither. I understand that the situation faced by the Channel Islands is similar to the rest of the UK. And there was a report titled "How One British Isle Persuaded Its Citizens to Get Vaccinated" by Steve Martin and Becky Sherrington. And clearly, as in the rest of the UK, nudge tactics were used on a compliant and unsuspecting community. We need to be reminded that informed consent has to be given. That is to say, freely given and without coercion. And I would say that using psychologists to target people in the Channel Islands or anywhere else, that's just not ethical. But I'm sure you can make your own minds up about that. I also understand that the people of Jersey and Guernsey have been left without access to any form of vaccine damage compensation scheme. The one that we have in the UK is not really fit for purpose, and it's a maximum payout of only £120,000. I have a constituent who's been given less than 5 years to live unless he has a heart transplant. He's in his 40s. He's got vaccine-induced cardiomyopathy. He's lost his job. He's lost his partner, lost access to his child, and he's probably going to lose 30 years of his life. It's difficult to think that £120,000 is possibly reasonable compensation for all of that. The safe and effective narrative has been pumped out in the Channel Islands and around the world. And people have been left on the scrap heap in one of the wealthiest parts of the British Isles. And that's just not acceptable anywhere. I'm also advised that, like many locations around the world, it's been very difficult for medical professionals to speak out about what they've been seeing in their clinics since the vaccine rollout. Many are saying that they've been silenced, and this is of grave concern in the Channel Islands as it is elsewhere. Public health requires that medical professionals are free to raise the alarm when they become aware of any issues that impact that public health, such as medical interventions. Indeed, medical professionals on all levels have a duty to speak out if they see harm being done. Comments made by a cardiologist, Dr. Dean Patterson, submitted to the General Medical Council, in which he raised these concerns about the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines and what he was seeing in the Channel Islands. You'll be hearing more from Dr. Patterson directly later this evening. As I say, we've got some great speakers, so I'm not going to speak for too long. So lastly, I'm going to talk about statistics, and that won't take long in the Channel Islands, because we actually haven't got any statistics for the Channel Islands. And if we were to have detailed statistics of the state of health of the Channel Islanders post-vaccination, that would be extremely helpful to uncovering exactly what's been going on. The UK figures are damning enough, so damning in fact that, having raised my concerns about excess deaths in 3 debates in the Chamber of the House of Commons, the Office of National Statistics have rebased the baseline calculation for population and expected deaths, raising them. Their system is opaque and hard to understand, but coincidentally, it's increased the deaths in 2020 and 2021 and reduced the deaths drastically that we're seeing as excess deaths in 2023. Some 20,000 premature deaths have been airbrushed from the statistics. So this is a huge concern to everyone around the world and the Channel Islands. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Senator Ron Johnson for Wisconsin, who's going to chair this evening. He'll introduce himself and he'll introduce all of our eminent panel of speakers. Thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you very much for attending this evening.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I'm Senator Ron Johnson. I'm a U.S. Senator. I represent the state of Wisconsin. I want to thank Andrew for his courage. Being one of the few in the U.S. Congress that has been raising these issues, I know really how lonely it can be, and how you were attacked for just raising what most people should be considering as a pretty legitimate question. So, Andrew, thank you for your courage and for your advocacy. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical researcher. My background is in accounting. The closest I've come to medicine is as a manufacturer for 30 years, providing plastic packaging material for things like endoscopic surgery devices. So that's as close as I've come. But at the start of the pandemic, I was the chairman of the Senate Oversight Committee, and seeing as other committees that you really should have been holding hearings on early treatment, on putting the pandemic in perspective. It wasn't Ebola, it wasn't SARS, it wasn't MERS. Very early on, we knew that the infection case fatality rate would be somewhat similar to a bad flu season, but yet everybody's freaking out. They were pushing the fear. So I started holding hearings, trying to put that in perspective, gave doctors like Pierre Corey, Dr. McCullough, Dr. Harvey Risch, George Fareed, others, a platform to question the narrative of what I in America called the COVID cartel. But we lost our majority. I lost my chairmanship in 2021. And so not having that chairmanship, all I could really do is hold public events. So the first public event I held was in Milwaukee in June of 2021, where I gave a number of vaccine-injured individuals the opportunity to tell their story, hoping for some measure of sympathy from the media. They literally got none. I followed up with another hearing with vaccine-injured and medical experts in November 2021, pretty much the same reaction. I followed that up in January of 2022 with probably the most popular event we put on, which was called COVID-19 A Second Opinion. And this is where we assembled close to 24 medical experts, people like McCullough and Corey and Dr. Merrick and Dr. Ryan Cole, he'll be here, Dr. Milhoan, a group of world-renowned medical experts, scientific researchers. And fortunately, because of my advocacy early in 2020, I was connected to this group of doctors, and I realized that there was a second opinion. And certainly from my standpoint, that's what we've always been told in medicine. If you have a serious medical condition, get a second, maybe even a third opinion. But that wasn't allowed. And so I guess I've been asked to chair this because I've done a pretty good job of keeping people on task, keeping them within their time frame, which I'll do here today, including myself. So let me make a final point. I've been asked to write a couple book forwards. I'm working on one right now. I was writing it yesterday, and let me tell you the point I'm making in this forward. Again, this is 4 years after the declaration of the pandemic. And I would say if I were asked if I was categorized global population, I'd put them into 3 categories. First, by far the vast majority of people are individuals that just want to move on. Whether they suffered from injuries or potentially caused injuries, with the best of intentions. They just want to forget the pandemic ever happened. They want to move on with their lives. They don't want to even consider that something they prescribed, pushed, recommended, or took, the vaccine, could have caused harms to themselves or to their patients or their constituents. So again, that's by far the largest group of people. I think societally, globally, we are in a massive state of denial, but that's the majority of people. Now, a second group, and I put myself in that category, is during the pandemic, our eyes were opened up. Now, some people already had their eyes open. Parents with already vaccine-injured children from the childhood vaccine schedules. People like Bobby Kennedy. These people already understood the corruption of federal health agencies, of the medical establishment. One thing that we have in common in the second group is once your eyes are opened, you cannot close them. And you feel pretty well compelled to try and awaken others to what is happening globally related to our freedoms, to our personal health. The third group is what in the U.S. they call the COVID cartel. In the U.S., it'd be the Biden administration, it'd be our federal health agencies, it'd be big pharma, who've completely captured our federal health agencies, plus they've captured the other COVID cartel members, the media and social media companies. That is the COVID cartel. That's the third group of people. These are the individuals that lied to the world public. These are the people that sabotaged early treatment. These are the people that pushed lockdowns that were devastating, mask mandates that they knew wouldn't work, all toward the goal of trotting out this mRNA vaccine platform that could be so highly profitable for big pharma. These are the people that caused this. They will never admit they are wrong, ever. And by the way, most people globally don't want to admit they were wrong. Listening to people like Fauci, taking the shot. Again, we're in a massive state of denial, but again, the COVID cartel, that third group, these people that caused all the damage. And what's unfortunate is they have the power. Again, they're the media. They control the social media. We've seen in lawsuits how our federal government pretty well coerced social media to censor individuals, to push lies, to censor the truth. So they have the power to make it almost impossible for us to prove them wrong. So that's where we are. 4 years after the declaration of the pandemic, the COVID cartel is in still firm control. They are depressingly effective at not being able to admit they were wrong or having to admit they were wrong. That's why you're hearing all these explanations now of cancers about accelerated aging. I mean, they're just pulling these things out of thin air. Cancers in young people are being caused by accelerated aging. We get a new term, sudden adult death syndrome. We'd already heard of sudden infant death, but all of a sudden there's this new syndrome, and they're just baffled by what might have caused it. So again, we have a huge challenge in front of us. The reason I certainly agreed to do this, I think it's very important that for anybody who's looking to find the truth or seeking the truth, and they have to be given that truth. They have to have access to it. And again, I'm just pleased to be associated with these courageous doctors who have put their careers on the line. They've been persecuted, they've been vilified, but these are the people that can speak with authority and give you that second, that third opinion that you probably haven't heard in the mainstream media or the social media. So let me stop talking. Let me turn over to our first guest, and I'll ask all these guests to introduce themselves. You know a whole lot more about your background, about your qualifications, but we will start with Dr. Angus Dalgleish, who's an oncologist in the UK. Doctor?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Am I unmuted?
Loud and clear, yep.
Right, very good. Thank you so much. And it's a great honor to be asked to be here and to be in a forum specifically with Peter McCullough, who I've admired very much from afar. And I've met Ryan and many of the others, but very nice to meet you, Peter. Now, from my point of view, I'm an oncologist, which is a clinical oncologist, and it's been a bit of a problem because I've been dismissed when I've said sensible things. Oh, he's only a clinical doctor. But these people forget that I was there at the beginning with HIV, and I was there in 1984 when Fauci promised a vaccine in 18 months' time, and 40 years later, we still don't have it. So I've been through all this, and I was the co-discoverer of the CD4 receptor, which is how I got involved in COVID in the first place. That my colleagues, collaborators, with whom we'd actually done a very good HIV vaccine, and it's we've published and everything on it. Fauci continued to ignore it for reasons I've only just started to realize more recently. But we are asked to help do a vaccine along the same lines. And my first thing with vaccine is less is more. The less you put into the vaccine, the more likely it is to work. And everybody went for the spike protein. Now, when we analyzed the spike protein, we found it had, and we wrote this all down, we had terrible trouble publishing it. We couldn't publish it for 3 months. It was turned down by every journal. We found out there were 6 inserts plus the furin cleavage site. And the importance of this is these inserts all gave the virus a charge of a pH of 8 as opposed to normal of 6, which meant it was highly charged and acted like a fridge magnet going onto the fridge, with really hyper infectability for human cells. The second thing that we did was blast analysis, and we pointed out the spike protein had 80% homology to human epitopes. And some of these were virtually 100%, like platelet factor 4, which would give you horrible clotting issues, and myelin, which would give you Guillain-Barré, etc. All these things have turned out to be true. We prepared a document, we gave it to our government here through Gove. I know it was discussed in Cabinet, went to Sage, Whitty and Valence, and they all decided to ignore it. So that's where I came from. So I was furious about that because we knew there would be significant side effects. It was just how bad would it be? Well, step forward, we know that we had the problems, and Peter was the first to call the myocarditis, stroke problems, etc. And others came out with a variety of things. And when they started to roll the vaccine down to the 50s and 40s, I mean, I protested like mad and went berserk when they suggested giving it to children, when it was the average age of death was 82. I mean, the whole thing was like a dystopian Orwellian nightmare we were descending into. But what brought me into this group very much was the boosters. And I've done a lot of work in vaccines over the year, the Institute of Cancer Vaccines Immunotherapy, which I'm a principal of. And we have an adage that if a vaccine needs a booster, it doesn't work. I mean, my goodness, does that never been more true than in this case? And patients who have been given these boosters, which I said were boosting against a virus that left the planet at least a year ago, and because it was a Coxsackie virus, anybody who's read the history of Coxsackie virus development knows you get a thing called antigenic sin or immunological imprinting. So it doesn't matter how many variants you vaccinate against, the immune system only sees the first virus that's disappeared. So it just produces lots of useless antibodies. But more importantly, the booster suppresses the T-cell response. And that's where I came in. I started to see in my melanoma clinic patients who'd been stable for years who suddenly came in relapsed. Sometimes the relapse was quite vicious. I mean, they had very bad disease. We had to retreat them all over again. And the only thing they had in common, we're used to severe depression and divorce, debt, bereavement, etc., suppressing the immune system and losing control of the cancers. But none of my patients had this whatsoever. They'd all been bullied by their GPs to have a booster just to be safe. And then I found that there were a lot of people coming down with lymphomas, leukemias, all of them had the booster. And I had 3 friends who only had the booster so they could travel after being locked down for 2-3 years. All 3 of them have relapsed and 2 of them have died. So we couldn't even treat these cancers. That was the other big, they didn't even respond to the standard treatment. So that is why I've got really, really vocal. I believe that using messenger RNA technology for infectious disease is basically a gross medical negligence. It really is criminal negligence now knowing what we do. And it's even worse, the fact that every time I've raised it with everybody. I've been carpeted by the hospital, been carpeted by the Royal College of Physicians, told to be quiet and that I'm upsetting the patients. And I said, no, I'm not upsetting the patients. I'm doing my job. First, do no harm. And I am like the canary in the gold mine. I am seeing harm and we must stop now. So I'll just leave that as my message and a big stop there.
Dr. Dalgleish, are other oncologists seeing what you're seeing? You can't be the only one. And are they talking to you?
Well, first of all, my own oncologists in my hospital were horrified and told me to be quiet, that I was upsetting their patients. When I published my concerns and documented and said it actually fits because you're getting T-cell suppression, you're getting immunoglobulins switched to tolerization, what have you, I got contacted from oncologists all over the world. From Australia, from South Africa, from America, from Canada, South America, Europe. They all said the same thing. And they all said that they were told it was just coincidence or a selection of anecdotes and to be quiet. Now, this is what the problem has been with this pandemic. It is being Orwellian control and denial of the facts and the total prevention of debate. Science is debate till you come to the right conclusion. So following the science or scientific consensus, these are complete misnomers. They are absolutely incredible that we've had to put up with this. I've had plenty of doctors come up to me and said, I would love to do what you're doing. I would love to join you, but I've got a mortgage and 2 kids at school I have to put through. That's what's been going on. They've been going for the doctors that speak out. I don't care because I'm past my retirement age. So that's why I have no qualms whatsoever in shouting.
So one of the things we're definitely witnessing 4 years into this now is, again, government censorship. I've myself written more than 60 oversight letters to our federal health agencies. They're not responding.
Exactly.
They have certain way they analyzed VAERS, for example. First of all, they ignored the safety signals screaming at them at VAERS. They do certain analyses on there. They won't release those to the public. They won't release this to us.
Yes.
So we're not going to get the truth out of governments. And I think that's true globally. Maybe a few jurisdictions might be a little more honest. So seeing as you've had other doctors contact you, they don't necessarily have to put their name to it, but is it possible for people like you or a group to have doctors submit, basic their practice data that would show increases in cancers? I mean, would that be a possible effort that we can undertake?
There are certainly people I could ask, and I do know some of the people with the best data, are really bright clinical researchers who've got most to lose. I mean, one of the guys who was joining me, he basically had a phone call from the top saying, if you do this, you will never get another NIH grant ever again. That is the level of coercion that's been going on. That is his livelihood. And it was just incredible. I hear this all the time, the threatening coercion. This is not a free and fair democratic society we live in anymore. And we cannot allow it to continue like this. This is something we really have to put back in the bag and never let out again.
So I know one of the questions the organizer wanted me to ask you is, what should local government do in the Channel Islands? What would you ask that they do?
The first thing that I'd ask they do is ban all messenger RNA vaccines. Ban the whole concept of giving a booster, which is only there's no way in the world these vaccines prevent infection. We know that from the Cleveland study and many other studies. The more vaccines, the more likely you are to get COVID or some other dreadful infection, or zosters, Bell's palsy, shingles of other sites. You know, it's just so obvious to any doctor that's seeing all this. So that's my first recommendation. Ban all messenger RNA vaccines for the future. Ban all boosters here and now.
But you understand one of the reasons that they continue to push the boosters, that's one of the techniques, so they never have to admit they are wrong. If they all of a sudden ban the boosters of the vaccine, that's a tacit admission that these things were not safe. They were not effective. So all the lies they've been telling us for years will be exposed. I mean, you understand that, right?
Yes, well, when I was at Andrew has had several parliamentary meetings, and I had discussed with somebody at one of these meetings. I didn't know exactly who he was, but he seemed to be very high up. And I said, "Why on earth is the government pushing these boosters?" And as coldly as you could like, he just said, "Well, they've spent such a fortune ordering far too many. They feel they ought to use them up." Now, this is even knowing that they're causing severe harm. I mean, it makes the whole thing even worse.
Have you been following the revelations about the DNA contamination, a different type of DNA contamination that is getting the cells, is getting the nucleus, and how that might impact increasing cancer rates? Are you following that at all?
Certainly I am, and I've been writing in the Daily Skeptic and the Conservative Woman. Actually, I wrote one only yesterday or the day before on, where I listed all the ways that a messenger RNA booster vaccine can cause cancer. It's now up to 8 major described mechanisms. And the most recent one that is worth pointing out is, and Ryan Cole will know very much about this, is that the early studies suggesting the spike protein bound to P53, BRCA and MSH, etc., which are suppressor genes. So if you inactivate these, you can't control cancer. You're basically taking the police out, as it were, has been completely confirmed by a study from Brown University, where they show it's absolutely true. And that's another thing. This was shown a couple of years ago, but it was withdrawn and retracted under severe pressure from the NIH and big pharma companies. This is what's been going on. It's unbelievable. Now, that binding of those suppressor genes could lead to a tsunami of cancer in the next few years. Because if you've got an abnormality in the suppressor gene, you end up with cancer 10, 20 years earlier than you normally have had it. So I'm really frightened what the implications are for this. But the contamination issue you brought up means that there's no quality control. I mean, the MHRA go on about the importance of quality. They have made it very difficult for a very safe procedure about a heat-killed mycobacterium thing I've been working on with no side effects at all, but has been shown in randomized studies to be beneficial. They have stopped it being approved because they keep bringing up safety issues and quality control. There were no quality control safety issues, as we know from this contamination in the batches. I saw that a presentation out of the studies. It's absolutely appalling. As soon as that became evident, they should have banned it.
Have you seen the stories where government officials and the people in charge have been attributing the turbo cancers, some people are calling them, to accelerated aging? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, yes, there's no doubt there are turbo cancers and accelerated. Absolutely, I've seen it myself. I've seen 2 this week. I tried to do very little new practice, but both the new patients I saw this week had basically had relapse and turbo cancers, i.e. very fast. And again, I mean, it's terrible. I said, "Can you tell me your vaccine history?" They both had not 1 booster, but 2 boosters, bullied by their GPs for them just to be safe, So there's many ways it could be turbo, because it upregulates PD-L1, which means you're protecting the tumor. I mean, we try to attack that and downregulate it with the latest immunotherapies, these Keytrudas and Optivos, etc. But it actually is activating pathways that program to escape immunotherapy and chemotherapy. And I've seen that in my own patients. I can't believe that their tumors didn't respond to standard treatments, and I knew it was due to the spike. Now I know a lot more reasons why.
Okay, Doctor, we've got to move on, but hopefully you'll stay on the call in case there's some other questions for you. So let's move next to Dr. Dean Patterson. He's a cardiologist in Guernsey. Dr. Patterson, can you describe your background and your qualifications and make your statement?
Yeah, thanks very much, Ron Johnson. I'm a cardiologist and a general physician. I have training in cardiology, vascular medicine, cardiovascular research and therapeutics. I've been working in Guernsey for 18 years. I'd like to put up some slides, which I'll share with you now. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Right, so this is an honest personal account of what I've been experiencing over the last few years since COVID happened. And Guernsey is one of the Channel Islands, which is to the south of England. And we have quite a few little islands, but we've got Jersey to the southeast and Guernsey, where we have a smaller population of 63,000. Jersey has 103,000. We have slightly different healthcare models here in Guernsey. We run a consultant-only service, so we don't have junior doctors, but it provides us with an exceptional level of continuity because we have to do most parts of the care chain, and because of that, we close the loop very well. We see things, I think, quicker than other centers, and for that reason, I think that's one of the key reasons why I was able to see something in relation to myocarditis. So one of the things that I've held myself to is risk-benefit analysis in healthcare. This slide looks quite complicated, but in essence, what you have is a red line where we have people who are offered coronary stenting, and the blue line is the medically treated patients. And the principle is that the lines will cross at a certain point, and this is defined by something called a fractional flow reserve in this case. Anything to the right, you see that the people who get stented do worse, and to the left, the people that get the stent do better. This principle in healthcare has been lost during the COVID era and throughout the vaccine rollout, and it's been quite mortifying watching this. The FDA actually knew about a list of possible side effects of special interest. They were given this by the CDC. I'm not sure where the CDC got it, but certainly maybe it was from animal studies. But there's a vast array of side effects, including myocarditis and stroke and some of the more common side effects. But certainly I don't recall being told about this list when I was asked to take the vaccine. I was told it was safe. And certainly my patients who I recommended to get the vaccine in the first few months, I'm not aware that they had this in the information leaflet. What is the best data about these new COVID vaccines? Well, the studies that were done and are yet to be fully published can only say that they were set up to prevent symptomatic disease. They can't actually tell you whether it can prevent hospitalization or death or stop transmission. And yet throughout this past few years, we've had every part of the mainstream media telling us things like it's 94% effective against hospitalization and will stop transmission. And if you go to the Nobel Prize winner, who is Dr. Drew Weissman, who is a co-owner of the patent in relation to the mRNA vaccine development, here's what he said about the safety.
How can we be sure that this vaccine will not cause long-term negative impact in humans? Like, that's one of our big questions that we hear a lot.
So I mean, the first is to understand what the vaccine is. The mRNA in the vaccine is identical to the RNA in your cells. So the RNA in your cells isn't causing long-term adverse events. So the RNA in the vaccine won't either. The RNA is degraded probably within a week. It's completely gone.
I won't let him go on too much longer, but effectively in the last part of his statement, he says that the lipid nanoparticle disappeared within 48 hours, and that the only side effect we should be worried about is anaphylaxis with a risk in 1 in 100,000, and that at that stage there have been 15,000 vaccinations and no other side effects seen. Well, this is a rather interesting contrast. In 2023, we saw 2 publications coming through. On the left, you can see what happens to the uptake of an isotope in someone who's been vaccinated. You can see the clear signal in red in the myocardium, and this is happening for up to 6 months after a vaccine. And on the right, there was a study by Brogner et al. Showing that blood testing in healthy people who have been vaccinated shows the presence of the spike protein for up to 6 months as well. These are 2 independent studies published around the same time, showing rather sinisterly the same duration of bioavailability of this mRNA, very much contrasting to what the Nobel Prize winner said when he said it lasts only a week. Dr. Paul Offord is a voting member on the FDA panel, and he voted for the authorization of these vaccines. He's an eminent vaccinologist and a pediatrician. He won this award in 2009. Here's what he has to say.
Our way out of this pandemic is to vaccinate the unvaccinated. That's it. I mean, we can have booster dosing, as is going to be recommended probably on this Thursday and Friday. We can give a 3rd dose to people who've already gotten 2 doses of mRNA vaccines, but that's probably not going to have much of an impact on this pandemic. The impact on this pandemic will only occur when we can convince those roughly 60 or 65 million people who have told you they don't want to get vaccinated. They want to continue to be fertile ground for the spread of this virus.
I found that statement rather incongruous with the evidence from the primary studies where they were not able to prove that the vaccine stopped transmission. And the whole premise for that statement falls apart when you think of it through those eyes. Now, he did a 180-degree turnaround. I think it must have been up to a year later.
Do the benefits of this vaccine outweigh the risks? I didn't see the benefits. We really need much better data, I think, before we move forward on this. And I can only hope that it's coming, because I feel very strongly about my no vote there. In fact, the only reason I voted no was because hell no was not a choice. And it just surprised me that we were willing to go forward with this with such scant evidence of benefit. I think that the phrase that I used was uncomfortably scant. So you just sort of felt like the fix was in a little bit here. Maybe that's not the right phrase, but it was something that they wanted. And I felt like we were being led here, and with a critical lack of information. Right now, they're saying that we should trust mouse data, and I don't think that should ever be true.
And then subsequent to that, he actually became a lot more scientific, one would say, with the following statement.
There certainly is a causal link between vaccination and myocarditis and pericarditis. No doubt about it.
After Paul Offord, we have Christian Müller, who's an eminent researcher from Switzerland, who did a study after booster vaccination where he found the following.
The incidence, therefore, was 2.8%, 800 times the incidence currently estimated.
So this is a really important study for safety. When you developing a new technology, if you find a significant level of signal where the troponin level is elevated, it does require ongoing follow-up. We have no long-term data. We don't know whether these people who had this reaction where the troponin went up in years to come under stress will develop an acute deterioration. But more importantly than that, 3.7% of women versus 0.8% men. That tells you completely different story from what the narrative was saying. The narrative was just young men. And importantly as well, these women and men who had this troponin rise were of all ages, not just young. In Guernsey, in a normal year, I've been here 18 years, we would see 5 cases of myocarditis. And over the years, we have maybe 1 serious case every 2, 3, 4 years. Now, something happened in 2021. Now, people were telling me all along that it's the COVID virus that causes this myocarditis. But I did not see one in-your-face case of myocarditis from COVID. Now, we had cases coming out of intensive care who'd been on a ventilator for 3 months, who managed just to survive and had some troponin rise. But when I subsequently assessed them, even these cases had no sign of scarring in their heart. Now, something started to happen when the people were getting vaccinated. Why? Because there was a temporal relationship. People came in 24 hours after the vaccine collapsed. They came in with chest pain. They came in with the troponin rise. And then we had a patient of mine who passed away very abruptly from severe myocarditis and thrombotic endocarditis, quite a rare combination. And had young people coming in subsequently, and then also older patients as they rolled the vaccine out. So there was a correlation with the age groups that were getting vaccinated. And this became very worrying for me for this to witness this. So I was calling for action right from that point. But I was told, don't worry, Dean, the COVID will kill more people. And in 2022, I've seen 22 cases. 23, I've got 19 cases outstanding. I think I'm going to be getting about 20 to 25 every year. And I've just this week got 2 patients currently in the hospital with the same condition. Now, there have been about 5
Dr. Patterson, I've got to keep on time here.
Yeah, sure.
So let me move on. We should have time because Dr. Corey's not here to come back and do some questions. So to take a look at what you haven't said that's important.
Fine.
I'll
move on just to the end. So my conclusion really is that the COVID vaccine myocarditis was only detected because we vaccinated the young people. If we had not vaccinated young people, we wouldn't have seen the signal. The signal in the older patients is lost because they all treated as coronary artery disease patients. They just, in the heat of coming out of lockdown, huge backlogs, all the COVID measures still hot. Everybody just treated all these adults just like they were just having a heart attack, and they failed to see that they were actually myocarditis cases. I've skipped over that pathophysiology step, but nevertheless, I think this is accurate. We know that the overall side effects are 1 in 800 from Fryman, but the myocarditis is the poster boy, isn't it? But there are much more serious side effects in the nervous system, thrombosis, and indeed cancer. We know these long-term side effects of up to 6 months, but that was after 1 or 2 vaccines. Systemic effects after 6 or 7 vaccine boosters, who knows? We only got data from 8 mice. I called for the end of the withdrawal of these vaccines a long time ago, and they have a serious adverse event profile. We should learn more from the aviation industry. If the COVID vaccines were indeed an aeroplane, they would have grounded it a long time ago. This happened 3 days ago in Guernsey. The plane overthrew the runway, and there was no one injured. The plane was fine, but they grounded the plane. They grounded the crew. We need to do better. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Patterson. We'll move on now to Dr. Scott Mitchell, who formerly was an emergency room doctor in Guernsey. Dr. Mitchell, please introduce yourself, your qualifications, and make your statement.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. My name's Dr. Scott Mitchell, and I was formerly an emergency department doctor in Guernsey and the Channel Islands. For reasons I'll come to later, I resigned from that post and now working privately. So I'd just like to entitle or discuss my presentation today, What is the Truth, quite simply. Things I'd like to cover are pandemic mortality, particularly covering the mortality as you go down the age ranges. Were the measures taken during the pandemic appropriate and proportional? Discuss the vaccine solution, ability to raise concerns and censorship, particularly affecting my own situation, and particularly related to Guernsey itself, potential signals of harm and excess deaths. So if we consider pandemic mortality from this, what was described as a novel coronavirus, we were getting information. It was quite difficult to get a lot of information, particularly out of China in the early days. But we were told by the WHO that the mortality rate was as high as 3.4%, and the case fatality rate from publications such as this described it as potentially over 4%. But if this was just based on cases presenting to doctors, the case fatality rate, rather than the infection fatality rate, which is all cases, even those with minor symptoms at home. And Ioannidis published later on this in October 2022, finding that the actual overall fatality rate was under 0.1% in those under 69 years of old, and dropped to a very small number, 0.003% in those 19 years old or less. So coming on to the response to the pandemic, I agree the solution was not to do nothing, but pandemic plans seem to be thrown out of the window. It's interesting that this pandemic plan, although geared towards influenza, was drawn up regarding Guernsey at the end of January 2020. Now, as it's influenza, which was expected to be the next pandemic, that there are some differences, but a coronavirus is a respiratory virus and behaves in much the same way. In history, we've seen that some pandemic influenzas have actually been possibly more fatal, such as the Spanish flu of around 100 years ago. So there were no plans for lockdowns, mask mandates, anything in this document. You can find it online and search through it. But I think because of the unknown, public health took a cautious approach and went with these lockdowns till we decided what we were dealing with. However, I was very concerned about possible collateral damage from measures taken, impacts on economics, mental health, for instance, and also delayed access to healthcare, and also things like, in that respect, you know, people with cancer who may not be diagnosed promptly. Was there an alternative? Well, yes, the Great Barrington Declaration, which was announced by 3 professors in October, professors of medicine, October 2020, suggested targeted protection, especially as the majority, the young and the healthy, were very low risk, as I've just discussed before. So the vaccine solution was pushed as the way out of the pandemic. It seemed to be an all eggs in one basket approach. Was it a great gamble? Dr. McCullough, who's on the call tonight, published an article in The Hill in, I think, August 2020, going through this in some detail, saying, yes, this is something that we've never done before, a rapid rollout of a vaccine during a pandemic. And, you know, there are risks associated with that. I was also concerned that simple interventions and repurposed drugs were vilified. We published, for instance, on ivermectin in mid-2021, showing a significant reduction in deaths. Other drugs that have been around for many years, as hydroxychloroquine, quite oddly, having fabricated data published in the Lancet as well. But even if you question the data on those, which can remain quite mixed, other simple things that, such as vitamin D, we recognized early on there was a correlation between vitamin D deficiency and worse outcomes, especially in hospitalized patients. The initial trials on the vaccines were a very short duration. And was there an overemphasis of efficacy? A relative risk reduction was the headline of around 95%, whereas the absolute risk reduction, because the numbers were actually getting COVID in these trials, were relatively small, you know, less than 200 patients out of 40,000 or so patients in the trial. And one of the main concerns with me, although the trials were done very rapidly, some of the aspects of the trial were done simultaneously rather than consecutively, it did mean we did have no medium or long-term safety data. Perhaps you could argue it was a risk for the vulnerable in that sense, but my big question is why they were eventually rolled out to younger people and children. All doctors take an oath, first do no harm. That doesn't mean not doing anything. It sometimes means calculating whether the benefits of an intervention exceed the risk. And with COVID being very low risk to young people, very few, if any, healthy children died from this, we have to question why this was the case. And early on, we knew there were serious short-term risks, such as myocarditis. And again, I have to say, we still don't know the longer-term risks, because these have only been used for a few years. So I protested this and sadly resigned from my position because I disagreed with the government approach in Guernsey. Health professionals should be able to raise concerns without fear of reproach or reprimand. This is actually part of good medical practice, which is the regulators in the UK's advice and kind of code of conduct for doctors. So I was very upset and curious as to why I was sent for investigation by the Guernsey Medical Director for doing so. I raised these concerns in an email late September 2021, and I was sent for investigation for using my work email to raise concerns, speaking to the media without stating it was my own opinion, although I never stated I was speaking officially on behalf of anyone, and potentially violating the Civil Service Code. And to this day, I have not had any response to the concerns I raised. It seemed more a strategy to silence me. As has been mentioned, Fryman and all et al. Have analysed the original trial data and found that the risk of a serious adverse event runs at around 1 in 800 people getting these vaccines. So again, might have been worth the gamble in older vulnerable people, but certainly not going down to children and younger people who are low risk. The risk of a serious advent outweighed the risk of COVID to them. So in Guernsey itself, is there a signal of harm? Well, I looked at a few things, including obtaining the registered deaths from the GREF in Guernsey, and this is the last decade of total annual deaths. It's interesting to note that during the peak pandemic year, there were low average deaths, 544. But going ahead after the vaccine rollout, when everyone had been offered the initial dose and possibly a booster of the vaccine, we saw the highest deaths for 2 consecutive years in 2022 and 2023. So if the vaccines are saving people from COVID, then why are there more deaths post the peak pandemic years? Other markers of a problem, there's been a lot of reports in the media recently suggesting the increased use of health services. The hospital has been at peak utilization, bed utilization, and cancer surgeries been postponed. The ambulance service has seen recently some of the highest call-outs for a long time, and the A&E department has seen around a 50% increase in attendance in the last few years. Now, some people would say, yes, we're having an aging demographic, people are getting older, and there will be an increasing demand on healthcare, but it seems a rapid increase in the need or utilization of healthcare services. So I just think these are a potential signal of something going on, a signal of harm possibly. We can't say definitely what it's down to, but I think it should be noted. So my recommendations is certainly an investigation is needed into whether mRNA therapeutics are causing harm, even if it's in a minority. I suggest we need to suspend their use until this is done, because is there really any benefit from giving further boosters? All the data's come from antibody studies in mice, and certainly Cleveland Clinic study suggested that one is more likely to get COVID the more boosters they have had. Is that due to repeated exposure to an antigen causing tolerance to it? We don't really fully understand, even immunologists, the complexity of the immune system. So I think we need to acknowledge those affected and offer help and compensation where appropriate. Thank you for listening.
Dr. Mitchell, let's move on to Dr. Ryan Cole. One of the individuals that has participated in some of my events, one of the individuals whose career has been, I don't know, totally destroyed, but close to it because of his courage. So Dr. Cole, why don't you introduce yourself and make your presentation?
Thank you, Senator Johnson, and thank you to the great people of the UK and the Channel Islands. It's an honor to be here. I'm Dr. Ryan Cole. I'm a board-certified anatomic and clinical pathologist. I did my training at the Mayo Clinic. I did a year of surgical pathology as the chief fellow at the Mayo Clinic. I did a year as the chief fellow at Columbia University in dermatopathology. Did PhD research in immunology and virology, and I've seen 500,000 patients in my career. Ran an independent lab for 21 years. So, and yes, my career has been destroyed for speaking out, and I would do it all over again. I'm going to quickly go through what some of my colleagues have touched on. Okay, what do we know? Well, I have no conflicts of interest. We're unfortunately in an era of wealth and wellness and not in an era of health and wellness, so we need to change this. Synthetic DNA and modified RNA injections are not vaccines, never have been, never will be. They are genetic transfection agents and therapies. According to the filings of Moderna and Pfizer, they know this. We don't know the long-term consequences of these, and they're still being developed for hundreds of other conditions. It's not just these COVID shots. I know everybody has COVID fatigue. I understand that. What we need to do is stop this platform. It's not meant for human use. It's not ripe for human use. For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. We are fooling ourselves and we're fooling nature. More injections, plain and simple, equals more infections due to immune suppression that Dr. Dalgleish covered. Cleveland Clinic showed this in a very straightforward study on their 50,000 employees. I'm not here to judge anyone that did or didn't get a shot. I'm just saying no more genetic shots, please. These are expired shots. These variants don't even exist, yet boosters continue to be pushed. You know, from day one, chasing a coronavirus with a vaccine was a scientific impossibility, always has been, always will be, because of the mutation rates of this family of viruses. Your body was turned into a factory for producing proteins. Human cells are meant to make human proteins, not foreign viral proteins. The cells don't lie. I'll show that. This is pathology. I'm not going to turn you into a pathologist in 7 minutes here, but I will show you what happens. That needle goes in the arm, vessels are broken, and then your cells start to produce this foreign protein. These brown dots, this is from my colleague, Dr. Burkhardt, the late great Dr. Burkhardt from Germany. These cells start to make this foreign protein. This is the toxic part of the virus, this spike protein. The lipid nanoparticles were known from day one to be dangerous. They accumulate all throughout the body. They don't stay in the arm. They go everywhere. This is from Japan, a FOIA study from Dr. Byron Bridle that he was able to obtain. They concentrate highest in the ovaries, which is highly concerning. The lipid nanoparticles themselves are not for human nor veterinary use, and yet they went into billions of people. As my colleague was mentioning, this synthetic mRNA, though Weizmann received the Nobel Prize in that Zoom video, he lied. This is the mRNA. This is a study out of Stanford by Dr. Roltgen and colleagues. 60 days later, the synthetic mRNA was still persistent, still present, and still producing this foreign toxic protein. Dr. Brogna, as mentioned, showed that this spike protein from the injections was still circulating up to 6 months later. We still don't know how long. And in addition, excellent research out of Oxford and Cambridge showed that this synthetic RNA causes shifting, and it's not just producing spike protein, but it's making Frankenstein proteins. It's making other proteins that can trigger the immune system. The spike protein can deposit in the brain. This is a study from Dr. Merz out of Germany. This is one out of Dr. Burkhardt's lab. This is one out of my laboratory showing spike protein in peripheral nerves. Spike protein accumulates and actually reproduces very quickly in the liver and causes autoimmune diseases. Obviously, the heart damage will be addressed by my colleagues, but this is showing spike protein in the coronary vessels in the cardiac tissues. Spike protein is abundant within those tissues. And again, these shouldn't be in the human body. This is in the adrenal glands, important for so many physiologic functions of the human body. These are all things that should have been known and disclosed before it went into one human. That advanced aging, we know the spike protein binds to the elastic fibers of the skin. All these black streaks, those are the elastic fibers. These are being destroyed by the spike protein. We also know that spike protein from the injections accumulates in the placenta, in the uterine lining, and in the testicles within the gametes, the sperm. Causes other viruses to reactivate, alters the innate immune response. That's the Marines of your immune system. It makes them drunk and they go back to the barracks and they're not on the front lines fighting other infections as well. These are known to cause clotting. It inflames the lining of the blood vessels and induces some interesting clotting pathways. We'll have more papers coming out on that soon. Several increases in rupture of the biggest vessel in your body, the aorta, and forms unusual amyloid rubber clot-like proteins. I've been working with some analytical chemists. We're going to have a paper coming out in the next couple of months. I think we know exactly what's causing these fibrous clots now. Unfortunately, there's a high percentage of people forming microversions of these larger clots, which induces a lot of pathology. It's happening in the living, not just being found in the dead. These shots are causing a rise in your IgG4. Everybody hears about antibodies. This antibody is what I want on my farm. I'm a beekeeper, so I want to build up a tolerance to different proteins. You know, if I get stung, I don't want to hyperreact. You don't want to build up tolerance to pathogens in life, because then you're a sitting duck. You're a ship without a keel. Your immune system won't recognize future variants. This is critically important. So cancer, that's the big question. I have just a few seconds left. We know countless mechanisms already whereby these mRNA injections, this synthetic mRNA, can cause cancer promotion pathways. Turbocancer is just a colloquial term. Advanced progression of disease is the clinical term. Dr. Dalgleish talked about it. It binds to an important tumor suppressor family of genes. This is a tumor. Every tumor cell in this particular cancer from the stomach is expressing spike protein. Here's a pancreatic cancer. Every single cell in this cancer is expressing spike protein. These are binding to these tumor family of genes and allowing them to move forward. Here's a patient on the left who had an aggressive lymphoma 3 weeks after a booster. On the right, you can see the aggressive nature of his tumor. And again, that's immune suppression amongst many other mechanisms. Here are the cancer trend rates. Just look at the line at the end on the right, and my time is up. So I'm going to just show you the trend lines, all going up. Great data out of the UK, except they're not reporting it anymore. And your disability data sets showed that by 2022, there was a 35% increase in claims for disability from cancer in your PIP UK disability clearances. These are the cancer death rates for 10 years running in ages 15 to 44. Look what happened in 21 and 22. At that, I will obviously run out of time, so I'm going to stop and open it up to any questions if there's time.
Just one quick question. Obviously, I was talking to doctors, medical researchers, even before the EUA was issued in December 2020. I wasn't going to get the shot. I mean, I'm not a medical professional myself, but there was enough known then that I wasn't going to subject myself to this experiment. Every month that's gone by, the VAERS report starts coming up, but now the science keeps backing it up, more and more studies. The question I have for you is, why has all of this been ignored? Why has it been it's been impossible to get federal health officials globally, government health officials globally, to take a look at the science? We're supposed to follow the science. Do you have an explanation for this?
Well, I do, and I would recommend everybody read Bobby Kennedy's new book, The Wuhan Cover-Up. One understands, the 77th Brigade in the UK was responsible for a psychological operation and a nudge operation on the people in the United States. The intelligence agencies were responsible, the Five Eyes Nation, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, US, UK. There was, from the top, a plan from the get-go. And if you go back to the Milken Institute, October 29th, 2019, Rick Bright and Anthony Fauci were in that meeting, and they said, gosh, we hate that it takes so long to bring a vaccine to market. But if we had a pandemic, and gosh, say it came out of China, we could rapidly print mRNA new technology and emergency authorize this new product without all this research. So I think there are a lot of puzzle pieces that fall together. A lot of it was a psychological operation, but there are large powers that be that controlled the narrative. This is all basic science. I'm not political about this. This is simply science, and a lot of it was known science, and that's a great question. Your oversight letters, I think, if they ever answer, we will find out the things they don't want us to know.
My recollection from that Rick Bright, Anthony Fauci panel at the Milken was they were just bemoaning the fact that we did not have a universal vaccination program, and it was going to take a pandemic to have one, and they got it and they pushed it. But thank Dr. Cole again. Thank you for your courage, and sorry to what's happened to your career. Let's move on.
It's an honor. Thank you, Senator.
Next, move on to Dr. Kirk Milhoan, a pediatric cardiologist, I think both Texas and Hawaii. Dr. Milhoan, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us your qualifications, and make your presentation.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Privileged to talk with you again and be on this panel. Got my PhD first in cardiovascular physiology and pharmacology from UCSD. My specific area of study was looking at the pathway for inflammation within the myocardium. Then eventually went on to get my MD and then became board certified in pediatric cardiology. Early on in this, when COVID first came out, it was acting down and it affected the body in pathways that I was familiar with. And it all started sort of revolving around how it acted on the endothelial cells and how important those are for maintaining blood that does not clot and maintaining the health of tissues. As it comes about, as we've learned now, much of what we're seeing is related to the inflammation that is caused specifically by the spike protein. The data are now out, and it's very clear that it acts through a number of pathways. It acts in more pathways that probably we even understand right now, but one of the main pathways that it acts is through an inflammation pathway that's similar to gram-negative sepsis. And for all of us in medicine, gram-negative sepsis is a very dangerous situation where there's large whole body inflammation that affects multiple organ systems. So as it's coming out, it's very clear how it acts is as an inflammatory induction. And when you have this inflammatory induction, that often leads to cell death, and then cells that die are replaced with fibrous tissue. So that's what we're seeing in the myocarditis. If people survive, even in children, we're seeing these scars that last and aren't going away. And these scars are associated with sudden cardiac death. So what I'm seeing as a pediatric cardiologist, I'm taking a break from clinic right now to speak, but what I'm seeing, I'm probably in 25 years of doing pediatrics and pediatric cardiology, I had never seen a vaccine injury. Now, since COVID vaccine came out, I probably see one every week, or at least I'm suspicious of it. And what I'm seeing in kids, we're seeing less myocarditis in the children because most of the parents have realized that this is not a safe vaccine for their children to take. So the number of vaccines are going down. We still have a number of children who are at risk because of the scarring of their heart, that they will always be at a certain amount of risk for sudden cardiac death. But what I continue to see is this tachycardia syndrome, and this is what's filling my clinics now. And patients know it because of their Apple Watch or their Fitbit, and their heart rates are going from 40 up to 180, down 1 to 150, then to 120, then to 60, and they're bouncing around. And the people come in and complain. And typically what the doctors do is they evaluate them with a long-term measuring of like an EKG called a Holter monitor. And they go, oh, it's all sinus tachycardia, so that's fine. And they ignore it. And a lot of my colleagues aren't even curious. I'm very curious about this because it's not acting like a postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome called POTS that we're aware of. These changes in heart rate are occurring while they sit and are at rest. But for some people, it's incapacitating. What I'm amazed about is that that COVID now and COVID vaccine has become very important part of my history from the patient. I don't ask about all the other vaccines schedule, but this one's very specific that I have to ask. And that's what I desire for my colleagues. I wish they would become more curious. It seems like doctors have lost their curiosity and have lost their ability to say, wow, we have a correlation, maybe there's a causation. Now we have all the data, as the presenters before me showed, we have actually all the data. We have the biochemistry data, we have the genetic data, we have the inflammatory data to show that the spike protein is cardiotoxic, and it's toxic to many other organ systems. And this is not questionable anymore. We know this. So we're very careful as pediatric cardiologists to watch children who've had chemotherapy because some of it's cardiotoxic. And so we watch these kids very, very carefully. We only use these medicines if we feel we absolutely have to. But we're very careful with things that are true cardiotoxins. The spike protein is a true cardiotoxin, and we don't need it. We don't need this vaccine product, especially in children, especially in healthy children. It's shown no benefit, and all it shows is harm. So we have it is not safe, and it's not effective. And so I agree with all the others that this should be taken off the market right away. We've long reached signal for that. So I'm just another voice out here, sometimes feels like in the wilderness. And I'm sort of bewildered over why we have left first principles of medicine. One, do no harm, and then be honest and debate and see what is actually hurting our patients and remove that as quickly as possible. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Senator.
So I've got two questions. First one, again, you're talking about the spike as being harmful. people can get the spike either from the coronavirus or from the vaccine. You say you're tracking these children's history very carefully. Do you see a marked difference between potentially a child who got coronavirus and might have got spike from the coronavirus versus the vaccine? Is there a volume difference in terms of the amount of spike that a child is going to produce? From the coronavirus?
Yeah, remember that the spike protein is not a normal mRNA, and so it sticks around a lot longer. So the load of spike protein for the infection, especially if they've never been vaccinated, is actually very small. It's much different, and we see that in clinical practice. I know they've been harping on this, that you get much worse and increased myocarditis with COVID infection versus vaccine. That's just not true. The JAMA Cardiology article out of the Nordic countries that did 23 million people showed that wasn't true. The least risk for myocarditis were the unvaccinated, and it went up with the number of vaccines you got. So I think that obviously I'm seeing much less problem in the kids with native COVID infections. Most of the time they didn't even know they were infected. What I have right now, what's complicating a lot of my discussions with my colleagues, is a lot of people have a hybrid. They had COVID already, then they got a vaccine because they wanted to play sports. And so the establishment wants to say it's all because of COVID. And I go, no, it's not because of COVID. The correlation is with vaccination.
Okay, again, I'm pretty well aware of the excuse making there. Okay, but I just want to get that out there. Secondly, you do some of your practice on an island, and we're talking to the Channel Islands here, and it's just different. You are more isolated. You have your own government. Do you have any advice to offer to medical practitioners and potentially patients on the islands, based on your experience in Hawaii?
Yeah, I think that it is harder because we have to do more when we're on the islands. I'm glad that we had two different practitioners join us today. I think we have to be incredible advocates for our patients. Often what's the challenge on an island is they don't have the higher level of tests, and it's harder to get. But I think to be able to give good risk assessments to the patients, especially if you have concern for cardiac damage, then they really need a cardiac MRI with gadolinium so we can actually give them a good prognosis in terms of, because a lot of times the study out of the Lancet, in the adolescent Lancet, showed that after 90 days, about half of them it resolved. So I'd like to be able to give that good news if I can, but we need the testing. I was just at the World Congress of Pediatric Cardiology, and the #1 voted abstract was the abstract out of the consortium of cardiac MRI that said, wow, there's a lot of vaccine injury. That was the #1 abstract for 5,000 pediatric cardiologists got. So this happens in our closed doors. Now, we can talk about that publicly at the World Congress, but they'll have a real hard time getting that accepted to be published worldwide.
I didn't see that as a headline across all the major news networks. So, okay, well, again, thank you, Dr. Milhoan. We'll go to our last participant here now, Dr. Pete McCullough.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. McCullough, again, to me, just a hero. I doubt there's been anybody who's had more visibility, been more vilified, had more of their career destroyed than Dr. McCullough, but he's unbelievably knowledgeable. He's got to have a photographic memory. He said, no, he just studies hard, and I think that's probably the truth. So, Dr. McCullough, can you introduce yourself, describe your background, and make your presentation?
Well, thank you, Senator, and thanks to each and every one of you for joining in this invitation. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. I'm in practice in Dallas, Texas, as a continuously board certified internal medicine and cardiovascular specialist, cardiologist, and non-invasive cardiology. I have a background where I attended Baylor University and then the University of Texas Southwestern, did medicine at the University of Washington in Seattle and trained in internal medicine, did 3 years of public service, obtained a graduate degree in epidemiology from the University of Michigan, cardiology from the Oakland University William Beaumont School of Medicine. I ascended the academic ladder was chief of cardiology at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, chief scientific and academic officer for the St. John Providence Health System, effectively a dean. And prior to the pandemic, my major research focus was the interface between heart and kidney disease, of which I became the most published and widely known physician in that field in the world. I was the editor of the inaugural textbook, Cardiorenal Medicine, editor of 2 major journals. But in the last 4 years, my career has taken on a far more important purpose, and that is to make my contributions to alleviate the suffering that's happened upon the population, both with SARS-CoV-2 infection and the COVID-19 vaccine program. I published the first multi-drug protocol for ambulatory treatment of COVID-19 in the American Journal of Medicine. That became the most widely used platform worldwide. It was the base for the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. Senator Ron Johnson invited me on November 19th, 2020 to be the lead witness, bringing America the news that we could treat COVID-19. That was in 2020. At that time, Senator, I didn't even know what social media was. And I always credit you for kicking me in the butt to get going with social media. And as we see here today, I have the #1 doctor account on Twitter of doctors who see and examine patients, which I do in my office. So I want to summarize these points of what I've learned today, and then we can bring it open to some more broad questions for the panel. The first point as a cardiologist is that community SARS-CoV-2 infection has been exhaustively studied, and it does not cause myocarditis to any significant degree. There have been a handful of putative cases, no hospitalizations, no deaths, and at autopsy of patients who die with SARS-CoV-2 infection, the virus is not found in the heart, or there's no inflammation in the heart. So this is an important point. So we can rule out SARS-CoV-2 infection causing myocarditis. A false narrative developed in cardiology and is still promoted to this day by the American College of Cardiology, and it comes from measurement of blood troponin in the hospital, which is a blood test to detect cardiac injury. That triggers an ICD code that gets codified in the records. And so broad, non-specific data polls have indicated, 30 to 50% of COVID-19 infections have an elevated troponin, as they would with any other infection in the ICU. And that's led to a CDC and cardiology false talking point that the infection causes more myocarditis than the vaccine. Okay, this is very important. It's false, and it leads to even more perverse recommendations. The American College of Cardiology says that COVID-19 infection causes a lot of myocarditis, so therefore we should give the vaccine and cause more myocarditis. You can see how ridiculous this is. I have directly challenged the American College of Cardiology. I've challenged the American Heart Association, European Society of Cardiology. I've written them exhaustively. I've been effectively forced out of the American College of Cardiology over this important issue. The second major point, June of 2021, the FDA and CDC say the vaccines cause myocarditis. We've heard a lot about this today. They say that it cause myocarditis, and they have proven cases of vaccine myocarditis. 90% are men, peak age 18 to 24. It's after the CDC and FDA warnings that all the sports teams and the military dealing with young men at this age mandate the vaccines. So the mandates followed after the warnings. This is very important when it comes to culpability. What we've learned from the literature is that the messenger RNA is physically in the heart. That's been shown by Crossan and colleagues at Harvard. The spike protein is physically in the heart, shown by Boehmeyer and colleagues. Both of them cause inflammation. Schreckenauer and colleagues have shown the messenger RNA is directly toxic to the cardiomyocytes, as Dr. Milhoan has indicated. So this is clear. It's absolutely proven that messenger RNA and its product, the spike protein, cause myocarditis. It's my inference that all messenger RNA products are likely to cause myocarditis. The heart seems to be a target for messenger RNA, non-specifically, probably because of myocardial blood flow and other features. This is really important point. Point number 3, the most common presentation of vaccine myocarditis is sudden death. is sudden death. We don't even have a chance to save these people. It's very important. Holscher and colleagues have published, I'm senior author, have published in the European Society of Cardiology journal, autopsy-proven cases of vaccine myocarditis. Not a single one had a chance to get an MRI or have blood tests. This paper was the #1 prize winner for the entire preprint server system for medicine, similar to what Dr. Milhoan pointed out. It's the #1 paper voted by the entire world on the US on the preprint server system before it was published in the European Society of Cardiology journal, which is a highly ranked journal. The fourth point is that if individuals have heart disease, they've had prior bypass surgery, congenital heart disease, or they have existing heart failure, they're more likely to manifest a cardiac vaccine injury that leads to an arrhythmia, like atrial fibrillation or ventricular arrhythmias, or develop heart failure. In my practice, I have a man who previously had a bypass surgery and an ICD in place, and he had a reduced heart pumping function, but he's a fully competent, high-level executive consultant. He took one shot of Pfizer messenger RNA vaccine, and he was in Emory University within 8 hours in cardiogenic shock, ultimately required a heart transplant, had a stroke, infection, reoperation. His life has been basically forever ruined by one injection of the Pfizer messenger RNA vaccine. And this is written up and chronicled in Trial Site News, every bit of this vignette. Emory University failed to report this to the vaccine event reporting system. In fact, they failed to acknowledge that the vaccine was the cause of this when it was so clear how fulminant his course was. And they encouraged him to take a second shot after transplantation. And that's when he reached out to me to show you how deep this vaccine ideology is. It's basically like a religious belief. Now, the fifth point, very importantly, is that what we're seeing, I'm convinced, is the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg. The biggest published series of myocarditis before the pandemic, across decades and decades of accumulating data, was 500 cases. In my practice before the pandemic, I had only seen 2 cases of myocarditis, and one of them was fatal. Now there are papers, Lane et al. In the British Medical Journal Open, 18,000 cases in a single manuscript. I am seeing dozens and dozens of cases. In my practice, I have well more than several hundred cases with myocarditis. That is how common it is. And it's sad to say, I don't have a chance to see all of those who've died of a cardiac arrest. In the Holscher paper that I've quoted, the cause of sudden adult death syndrome is very likely to be vaccine-induced myocarditis. And it may be so sufficiently subtle, it couldn't be detected on an MRI, even if we got one. We have a hint that the vaccines fundamentally alter metabolism of the heart, and it was published by Nakahara and colleagues, demonstrating in 700 vaccinated, 300 unvaccinated, uniform abnormal cardiac positron emission tomography scans in the vaccinated. The myocardium normally prefers free fatty acids as a substrate. It shifts to preferring a diseased pattern substrate, 18-fluorodeoxyglucose, almost like an ischemic pattern. Maybe there's microaggregation of red blood cells and some degree of chronic ischemia in patients who've taken the vaccine. We don't know. All I can tell you is in this study, it's very disturbing. 100% of the cardiac PET scans are abnormal. Obviously, smaller fractions exhibit symptoms. But I have seen cases evolve and present now 3 years after the vaccine, with documented cardiac arrests 3 years after vaccination. So it appears as if we're seeing just the tip of the iceberg. The US FDA regulations on genetic products say that our window of regulatory concern is at least 5 years, and it may be at least 15 years after the injection. So I think we should be very sober about this. that we're looking at a very long period of time of concern for patients as the public wakes up to this. The final point is regarding management. I agree with Dr. Milhoan. We are finding that we can actually manage myocarditis if we can detect it. So the issues are screening and detection, use of advanced blood testing to the extent we can do that, and advanced cardiac and electrical imaging. We need to risk stratify people who are at risk for severe disease, including sudden death. Detoxification. I've published the 2 first papers on detoxification. The human body can't seem to get rid of the spike protein, but it looks like some natural products can assist in doing this. We're trying to find the right doses and the right dose schedule, but we have enough, you have thousands of patients under treatment. We have enough evidence around the world that it's working. It's very slow, but it's working to detoxify this spike protein out of the human body, assist the body in clearance. By personal communication, Kevin McKernan has implied that the messenger RNA will be broken down over time by human RNases. So this could be good news if we can just manage the spike protein. And then the other major principle of treatment is manage the inflammation, of which we use colchicine. I think colchicine may be one of the most frequently prescribed cardiovascular drugs now in the world. I commonly prescribe it. It was previously used for gout, but it is a class 1A indication for pericarditis. Most cases are actually myopericarditis. The Japanese use it extensively. Colchicine has been proven to actually, believe it or not, preventively prevent myocarditis, even in an individual who had a vaccine. That's been published. And it is a standard drug to be used. Recently, the FDA approved colchicine broadly for prevention of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. So we should see and encourage a lot of colchicine use. It's a simple generic drug, can be taken once a day or twice a day in more severe symptoms. Sadly, I've had pharmacists deny patients colchicine when they understand it could be used for COVID vaccine myopericarditis, even though it's a class 1A indication. And then lastly, the goals in treatment is when we find heart failure or left ventricular dysfunction, we use standard heart failure drugs. And there are patients in my practice, and we've seen them elsewhere, that need ICDs or pacemakers or both in order to prevent sudden death or progressive conduction system disease. So in summary, COVID-19 vaccine-induced myocarditis, I believe, is probably the leading cause of sudden adult death syndrome. We're seeing now just the tip of the iceberg. This is extremely worrisome. We have a great need for nationwide screening and detection programs, risk stratification, and for those discovered, preventive treatment to prevent sudden death and progressive heart failure. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. McCullough, again, thank you for everything you've done. Thanks for your time here today. We've only got about 8 minutes before I throw it back over to Andrew Bridgen. But I do want to ask you one question, because I don't know of anybody who, I read your Substack. I mean, you are scouring the literature. You're exposing, what we're learning. And of course, there's so much we still don't know. Why is the science being ignored? Why has it been ignored? What's the dynamic here within the federal health agencies, within the medical establishment? Why aren't they following the science?
This is a historical pattern. I'm becoming convinced of it. This goes back to the failed smallpox vaccines in the 1800s. There is a vaccine ideology, a hubris. And the ideology says that mankind is vulnerable to infectious diseases, and through the brilliance of science, we can make human populations more resistant and more robust. And when vaccine programs occur, even with the smallpox vaccine in the 1800s, these were dirty vaccines. They were contaminated with staph and strep and syphilis and tetanus. They couldn't be purified because it's the 1800s. And yet we fell into a pattern for decades of forced vaccination, untold numbers of vaccine deaths due to secondary infection. The vaccines didn't even work. People got smallpox so readily. This led to the Anti-Vaccination League, which was a well-documented public resistance to vaccination. The city of Leicester, England, did not vaccinate anyone for smallpox, became a control group, and ultimately fared much better. And then we go right into the polio vaccine, measles vaccine, diphtheria, and tetanus and pertussis. Once there is a commitment in this vaccinology for mass vaccination, it basically says, listen, the vaccines are flawed, but in order for them to work, everybody must be vaccinated. And in fact, we're going to turn a blind eye to safety. It's been going on now for hundreds of years, and this is exactly what's going on. Those little clips of showing, I think it was Paul Offit, that shows you how that his mind is thinking, that it's basically, it's an ideology. It's like a religion.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for all you've done. And I don't know the organizers, whether they had other participants that wanted to ask questions, but we're rapidly running out of time. You know, I think my participation's complete, and I'll just turn it over to Andrew Bridgen. Again, Andrew, thank you for everything you've done for making this issue, bring it to the fore, exposing things in the UK and England.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you to all the contributors this evening, many of whom I've spoken on platforms in various parts of the world and the UK. To all those in the Channel Islands who are listening this evening, I think the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. There is no commercial benefit for any of us speaking out. Indeed, we've all been vilified for telling our truths. I would appreciate it if all the expert panelists could forward to the organisers all of their slides. I would suggest that the elected representatives think very long and hard about your duty to do the best by those who've put you in those positions of privilege and power. You have the ability to make changes in the Channel Islands. You have the ability to lobby now to stop these unsafe and ineffective so-called vaccines being distributed and continuing to do harm. And just like the rest of the world and the UK, the longer we go on without admitting we've got a problem, the longer and the worse the problem will go on, the more harm that we will do. So thank you very much to all the excellent contributions this evening, and especially to Senator Ron Johnson, who's been a great friend over the last few years when it's been rather lonely. We will continue to get this message out to anyone who's willing to listen, and I'd urge everyone to do your own research. The evidence is all out there and available for anyone who wishes to see it. Thank you very much for listening to us this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure.